Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It was a quiet morning by the lake, coffee brewing, jazz playing, peace all around. Then the front door burst open. A woman in heels, armed with a fake badge and a mountain of lies, stormed in claiming I owed an HOA I'd never joined. That was the moment my war began. It was a quiet Saturday morning, just the way I liked it. The coffee was brewing, the lake outside was still as glass, and the smell of cedar from the deckboards mixed with the Texas breeze coming through the open windows. I had Miles Davis playing low on the speakers, and for a moment, life felt undisturbed. In the kitchen, I was pouring 2 mugs of coffee, one for me, one for my weekend guest, Jeffrey Wilkinson, federal judge, old friend, man who could reduce arrogant attorneys to sweat puddles with a raised eyebrow. He was still in the guest room, probably reading the paper in his boxers, the way he always did when he came down from his cabin nearby. My property sat just outside Cypress Ridge, a shiny, overpriced HOA development full of symmetrical lawns, smug neighbors, and rules so tight you needed a permit to sneeze. But my house was not part of their little utopia. I bought it 2 years ago at a county auction, seized property, clean title, 0 encumbrances. I had my real estate attorney vet every scrap of paper before I signed. I wasn't some naive transplant. I knew what I was doing. I had just set the mugs down when I heard the front door creak. Now, mind you, I never leave it unlocked when I'm not expecting someone. But today, out of habit, or maybe the fog of morning, I had. The door didn't just open. It swung open like a SWAT raid. And before I could even move, a woman marched inside like she owned the place. Mid-50s, shoulder-length dyed blonde bob, pinched lips, and an expression that made you want to apologize for existing. Her blouse was tucked too tightly into her slacks, and on her chest swung a laminated badge that read, Cypress Ridge HOA, President. "Excuse me?" I said, blinking at the walking violation of trespass laws. She didn't even pause. She stormed past me, practically brushing my shoulder with her designer tote. "You owe the HOA $2,800 in unpaid dues and landscaping violations," she barked. "You've ignored 3 notices, and now we're escalating enforcement." I just stood there, stunned, the absurdity hitting me like a second cup of espresso. "What the hell are you talking about?" I said. "You are in violation of community codes regarding unapproved facade modifications, non-regulation exterior colors, and unregistered structure extensions." She rattled off like a parking meter with a law degree. She pulled a tablet out of her bag and began tapping furiously. "You must be confused. My property isn't part of Cypress Ridge. This land was never under HOA jurisdiction. It's outside your boundaries." She turned toward me, face hard as granite. "That's incorrect. This lot was incorporated into HOA oversight following the annexation vote last year. You are now a dues-paying member, whether you like it or not." Then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, she walked deeper into my house, turned her camera on, and started snapping pictures. "Hey," I said, stepping forward, "you are trespassing. Get out of my house." "This will help streamline lien enforcement," she muttered. "Better to document all assets in case we need to seize for non-payment." Seize? That's when Jeffrey appeared from the hallway. No robe, just a faded UT t-shirt and old jeans, holding his coffee like it was a gavel. His voice cut through the room like a cold knife. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "Did you just enter this home without a warrant or consent?" The woman stopped cold. Jeffrey stepped closer. "I'm Jeffrey Wilkinson, federal judge. You're currently committing a criminal act. Identify yourself and explain what the hell you think you're doing." The shift in her face was priceless, like a balloon slowly deflating. She straightened up, but tried to recover with a stammer. I'm Karen Wallace, president of the HOA. This property is under our governance. I have a key." "A key?" Jeffrey tilted his head. "You have a key to a home you don't own?" "Well," she started flustered. "It was issued by the community security firm in case of emergency inspections." "Stop!" I snapped. "No one has access to this home except me. There is no emergency. And if you take one more photo in here, I swear." Karen didn't back down. Instead, she marched over to me and shoved a folder into my chest. "Your signed agreement to join the HOA and the updated zoning map showing your lot within Cypress Ridge." I opened the folder. The signature wasn't mine. It was a sloppy imitation. "The map?" a photocopy of the development plans with a red line awkwardly drawn through my lot, and the date on the signature, 4 months after I closed on the property. Jeffrey leaned over my shoulder, scanned the papers, and scoffed. "This is laughably fraudulent." Karen stepped forward, trying to snatch the documents back. "That's HOA property." "Don't you touch these," I warned. She lunged again. At the same moment, Jeffrey pulled out his phone and began recording. "You've now added attempted evidence tampering and possible document forgery to your rap sheet," he said dryly. I pulled out my own phone and dialed. "Sheriff, I need deputies at my residence immediately. I have an HOA president who broke into my home, is photographing my property, and just tried to seize forged documents." Karen turned pale. Still, even as we stood there, me with my phone, Jeffrey filming, her trembling with rage, she didn't leave. She stood her ground like this was her personal crusade. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "We're not some powerless association. You'll regret this." Jeffrey took a slow sip of his coffee. "You should go before the deputies get here. Trust me. It won't look good when they find you in someone else's home with a fake contract and a camera full of stolen property shots." Finally, Karen backed toward the door, her heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood. She paused before stepping outside and spat, "You don't understand who you're messing with." "Oh," I said, following her to the porch. "I think I'm starting to." She got into her silver Lexus, slammed the door, and sped off without another word. Jeffrey stood next to me, both of us watching her car disappear down the gravel drive. "Christ," I muttered, "this is going to be fun." The sheriff's deputies showed up 20 minutes later. 2 patrol cars, lights off, engines humming. By then, Karen was long gone, but Jeffrey and I were ready with her forged documents, the photos she took, and the full video we'd both recorded. Deputy Morales handled it with professional calm. He took our statements, logged the evidence, and made a note to escalate this to the county investigator. I appreciated his tone. He clearly thought it was nuts, but not so nuts that it wasn't worth taking seriously. By Monday morning, I was back to work, filing contracts remotely for a client in the energy sector when the next salvo hit. A courier dropped off a thick manila envelope at my front gate. I opened it, expecting more HOA junk. Nope. It was a summons. Cypress Ridge HOA was suing me for $9,800, allegedly unpaid dues, accumulated penalties for failure to maintain visual consistency, unapproved structural modifications, and, of all things, hostile behavior toward HOA personnel. That last one? Bold. I called Jeffrey immediately. He was quiet for a few seconds before muttering, "These people are either stupid or dangerous. Maybe both." Inside the envelope, they'd attached an evidence packet. Same doctored agreement, same cartoonish zoning map, plus half a dozen photos Karen had clearly taken inside my home, photos I had never authorized. One image showed my living room bookshelf, zoomed in on a bottle of bourbon and a couple of framed court sketches from my litigation days. Another was of my terrace out back, apparently proof of non-compliant additions. Funny, since that terrace had been there since the late 90s. A prior owner's project. All of it made my blood boil. It got worse. The very next morning, I received a letter, this time with a Gold County seal. The Office of Code Compliance had received an anonymous complaint. Allegations of unsafe residential conditions, unpermitted lakefront modifications, and decking hazards that pose danger to pedestrians. Pedestrians? I live 50 yards from the nearest road, surrounded by trees, water, and silence. Someone was trying to bury me under bureaucracy. I didn't even need to guess who. It was a 2-front assault, court and county, so I moved fast. I retained my own attorney, Mindy Alvarez, a smart, no-nonsense property litigator who once took down a golf course HOA in Galveston so thoroughly they voted to dissolve themselves out of embarrassment. We filed a counterclaim within 48 hours. Illegal trespass, attempted fraud, defamation, invasion of privacy, and mental distress. Then I went on the offensive. First, I compiled every document in my possession: title, deed, closing statement, survey maps, plat records. I also submitted my own complaint to the county clerk's office and requested a parcel boundary audit through the local zoning board, asking them to compare official GIS data with the map Karen had presented. I wasn't just defending myself, I was laying a legal minefield. Meanwhile, Jeffrey reached out through his network. A retired colleague he knew on the State Bar's Ethics Committee helped us draft a formal inquiry request into Cypress Ridge's general counsel, who had co-signed the lawsuit. If they were submitting forged documents to the court, someone was going to lose more than just a case. But what really blew this thing wide open happened almost by accident. I stopped by the local building permit office to request a history of my property's filings. I figured it'd be boring, boilerplate. Instead, the clerk, an older guy named Wendell, squinted at my address and said, "Funny, you're the third guy in 2 months asking about parcels on the lakeside line. Same situation too, saying they ain't part of no HOA, but suddenly getting bills." I leaned on the counter. "You remember the names?" He tapped his computer and turned the screen toward me. 2 names, both recent buyers, both like me, with clean title histories. Both had suddenly been absorbed into Cypress Ridge without their knowledge. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some personal vendetta. It was a pattern. They'd figured out a system, find isolated parcels near the HOA boundary, use redrawn maps and faked agreements, and hope the new owners were too overwhelmed or uninformed to fight back. But me? I'd spent 16 years as an oil and gas attorney in Texas. I knew how to dig, and I knew when someone was betting on fear and silence. I called both homeowners that evening. One of them, a widowed teacher named Elaine, was nearly in tears when she realized she wasn't the only one. The other, a retired Navy commander named Ron, cursed so hard I had to put him on speaker just so Jeffrey could enjoy the show. We formed a plan. Elaine still had letters and emails from the HOA, including a strange PDF labeled integration form that supposedly auto-enrolled her property post-purchase. Ron had gone so far as to send in a payment once. He thought it was legit, and he kept the check stub. We added these to a shared drive for evidence. I updated Mindy. She requested consolidated action. If this scheme was systemic, our counterclaim could become a multi-party fraud case. Back at my house, I installed 3 more security cameras, locked every door, and started keeping my gate closed during daylight hours. Because one thing was clear, Karen wasn't done, and neither was I. 2 days after filing our counterclaim, I noticed something odd in the mailbox. No, not a bill this time. It was a newsletter, the glossy, smug kind printed on thick stock, labeled Cypress Ridge Community Voice. I would have tossed it into the recycling bin without a glance if the subject line hadn't stopped me cold. Local property owner threatens safety and aesthetics of community. What you need to know. I read the whole thing 3 times just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. They didn't use my name directly, cowards rarely do, but everything in it pointed at me. The article described a recent resident on the lake's edge who had refused to comply with HOA standards, verbally assaulted community representatives, that would be Karen's home invasion apparently, and operated an unregulated legal business from home. Then came the best part. This individual's reckless behavior poses a danger to the family-oriented harmony we've built over the past decade. I laughed, then choked on that laugh when I saw the byline. Thomas Satterfield. I knew that name. Freelance journalist, technically. Former PR guy for one of Cypress Ridge's biggest landscaping contractors. A guy Karen once described during a local HOA town hall video I found online as a real asset to our communication strategy. So now they had a paid mouthpiece. A propagandist with a printing budget. By evening, the HOA had distributed the newsletter to every home in Cypress Ridge. I know this because Elaine, one of the other victims, texted me a photo of it lying on her porch. Ron, ever the sailor, called me 30 minutes later and said, "They just lobbed a goddamn propaganda grenade. They weren't just suing me anymore, they were smearing me." I called Mindy. She wasn't surprised. "HOAs love to play the court of public opinion," she said. "Problem is, they're not ready when someone fights back in the real court." But I didn't want to just fight back in court. I wanted to scorch the earth they stood on. So I called a guy I knew from my law school days, Rick Mendez, now a producer for a popular YouTube legal channel called HOA Hunter. His content specialized in exactly this kind of thing. HOA overreach, homeowner nightmares, corrupt boards getting publicly dragged. Rick loved the story. "Wait, you've got a sitting federal judge as a witness?" he asked. "Are you serious? That's gold." 2 days later, we filmed an hour-long interview at my house. I laid it all out. Karen's break-in, the fake contract, the bogus lawsuit, the manipulated zoning maps, and the new wave of targeted harassment. I showed him the newsletter. I gave him copies of the evidence packet they filed in court. Rick whistled when he saw the photo Karen took of my bourbon bottle. "You know," he said, "for someone who wants to seem professional, she sure can't resist committing felonies on camera." The video dropped 3 days later. By sunset, it had 100,000 views. By the end of the week, nearly 500,000. And people were pissed. The comments section exploded. HOA horror stories, calls for Karen to be arrested, tips from other Cypress Ridge residents who claimed they'd been threatened by the board. One anonymous commenter said their elderly father was fined $500 for having an unauthorized American flag mount. Another claimed their backyard was forcibly remodeled to remove non-compliant flora. It got attention, too much attention. That same week, the HOA tried to hold a closed-door emergency session to discuss the rising tide of misinformation. A neighbor leaked audio of the meeting. Karen could be heard yelling, her voice cracking, accusing that bastard Holloway of manipulating public opinion and weaponizing YouTube, which, of course, I was, because it worked. The next day, local CBS affiliate KXPL sent a reporter to my property. I was hesitant at first, but Mindy gave the green light. "Let the press dig," she said. "They're faster than subpoenas." I gave the reporter a short interview, kept it calm, composed, no theatrics, just facts. He was floored when I showed him the fake HOA agreement and the stamped deed that clearly excluded my property from their jurisdiction. They aired the story that night at 6. And then something truly unexpected happened. A man named Stephen Krause emailed me. He used to be the HOA's treasurer 5 years ago, said he quit after creative accounting requests from Karen, and he'd kept records, bank statements, email logs, meeting notes. I called him. He sounded nervous but determined. "They've been at this for years," he said. "Mostly quiet stuff. Padding vendor contracts, billing homeowners for things that were already budgeted. But what you're dealing with now, this is new. This is desperate." I set a meeting. Stephen dropped a USB drive in my mailbox that night. He didn't even want to be seen talking to me in public. Inside, emails that made my stomach turn. One from Karen to the HOA attorney read, "If we can just apply the annexation template again, these outer parcels will fall under our net before they even know it. By the time they complain, we'll have precedent." Precedent. That was the word that made it real. This wasn't just an aggressive HOA. It was a predatory structure operating under the legal equivalent of camouflage. And now their net had a hole in it because I'd torn it open. They say the worst battles are fought in silence. But silence was the last thing Cypress Ridge believed in. If they couldn't win in court, and they couldn't win in the public eye, they'd try to win by choking the air out of my life one nuisance at a time. It started with the lock glue. I came home from a quick grocery run one afternoon, arms full of bags, and found my front door deadbolt jammed. I tried the key, nothing. It turned halfway, stuck, and refused to budge. I circled around back. Same story. Garage keypad didn't respond either. Someone had injected glue into all my exterior locks. Luckily, I kept an emergency lockbox stashed behind the shed. 5 minutes later, I was inside, breathing hard and holding back fury. Next came the spray paint. A few days later, I woke up to the sound of a car door slamming. I looked out the window just in time to catch a figure in a hoodie speeding off in a dark SUV. Down on my fence, sprayed in thick red letters, "Pay HOA or pay the price." I filed a report again. Deputy Morales came out for the 3rd time in 10 days. He was polite, but he had the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "You got cameras?" he asked. 3, I said. "Just ordered 5 more. That night, I set up motion-activated floodlights and ran perimeter alarms through a cloud app. I wasn't just a target anymore. I was a damn fortress under siege. The HOA didn't just want to break me financially. They wanted to psych me out. I didn't blink. What really kicked me in the teeth was what came next. A letter from the Internal Revenue Service. An official notice, sealed and stamped. According to their records, they'd received an anonymous complaint alleging that I was operating an unregistered legal consultancy business out of a residential property without proper classification or tax reporting. They started a preliminary audit of my 1990s and financial history. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter open beside my coffee mug, and laughed. Then I didn't. I'd never accepted $1 for my private practice since moving here. Every contract review, every bit of advice I'd given friends or neighbors had been pro bono. I wasn't stupid enough to expose myself like that, but even a false flag with the IRS was enough to tie me in knots for weeks. They knew what they were doing. I called Mindy and read the letter to her. She went quiet. "This has Karen's stink all over it," she finally said. "You think they actually have contacts in the IRS?" "No," she said, "but filing a complaint is free. All they need is your name, a printer, and a vindictive streak." Jeffrey, who was back at my place for the weekend, nodded grimly over his morning paper. This is what weaponized bureaucracy looks like. No bullets, just paper cuts, until you bleed out. The next day, I filed a formal request for identity disclosure under the IRS Whistleblower Office regulations. I didn't expect much, but it would at least be on record that this complaint had no basis. Meanwhile, I launched my own offensive. I reached out to a contact in the state tax assessor's office, someone I'd worked with during my oil and gas litigation days. He pulled Karen's name and ran a few background queries. Two things stood out. One, her own HOA salary had nearly doubled in the past 3 years. Two, she had recently filed a business registration under the name Cypress Consulting and Compliance Services, LLC, a separate entity, not part of the HOA, which meant Karen was personally profiting by offering regulatory consultation to new homeowners, consultations she framed as mandatory. My blood turned cold. That's when it became clear she wasn't just enforcing the rules. She was creating the problems, then selling the solutions. I compiled everything: IRS notice, the LLC records, the spray paint, the glued locks, photos, video stills, audio leaks. I handed it to Mindy, who started building a pattern of harassment dossier to strengthen our counterclaim. And, as if the devil herself couldn't stand being upstaged, Karen struck again. A drone. It showed up 2 days later, hovering low over my back deck, camera angled downward. I walked outside with my coffee and stared at it. The thing just hovered, buzzing like a mosquito that didn't know it was already dead. I grabbed my phone, filmed it, then called the sheriff again. This time, I didn't ask for Deputy Morales. I called the sheriff himself. "Your deputies have been out here 4 times, I told him. "I have vandalism, property surveillance, IRS harassment, and evidence that someone's profiting illegally from a non-profit HOA. If I don't get help, I'm going public." Again. He sighed like a man at the end of a long shift and promised he'd send someone with authority. That evening, an investigator from the sheriff's department came out, took a full statement, asked real questions, requested copies of documents. We were finally past the "we'll take a note" phase. Karen had escalated this to psychological warfare, but she underestimated one thing. I'd been through corporate litigation against billion-dollar oil companies. I'd fought in courtrooms with more snakes than a Baptist tent revival, and I didn't lose sleep over middle-aged tyrants with drones and Sharpies. I just loaded the next round. By the end of that week, my dining room looked like a war room. Maps, contracts, screenshots, legal briefs, a corkboard full of HOA org charts with red thread connecting board members to contractors and to Karen. It was starting to look less like a dispute and more like a conspiracy indictment in progress. Mindy called early Friday morning. "Judge approved your motion," she said without even saying hello. I blinked. "Wait, the one for HOA records access? Full financial discovery, 7 years. Their banking records, meeting minutes, vendor contracts, and communications." I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. "Holy shit! You want the bigger news?" she added. We got it expedited. 3 days later, I was standing in the conference room of her firm in downtown Houston, watching a banker's box full of Cypress Ridge HOA's bookkeeping being wheeled in like it was radioactive. It was radioactive. Within the first hour of review, we found what we were looking for, and so much more. Let's start simple. Over $312,000 in miscellaneous enforcement fines collected over the past 3 years. No breakdown, no line items, no receipts, just lump sums. Then came the vendor contracts, rental agreements for vacation properties that, according to plat records, weren't even HOA controlled. They'd been leasing out homes they had no legal right to touch, including one cabin owned by a retired Marine who lived in Colorado and had no idea his house was being rented to corporate weekenders. Mindy's junior associate, a kid fresh out of law school, looked up from one stack of documents with his jaw halfway to the carpet. They built an entire revenue scheme off fake enforcement. Oh, but it gets better. There was a video. Tucked inside one of the digital folders from the HOA's internal server was a training session. Poorly filmed, grainy audio, like it was meant to be deleted after one viewing. Karen stood at the front of a community center room, speaking to 3 new HOA staffers. "A lot of these homeowners don't know what they signed," she said, pacing. "They move in, they assume they're part of the association, and they act like sheep. We reinforce that idea. Confidence is half the law. If they push back, we show them the paperwork. Most won't bother to challenge it." One of the trainees asked something about actual boundaries. Karen smiled. "Don't get hung up on the plat maps. Those are suggestions. Perception is power. The more they believe we're in charge, the more they comply." I paused the video and stared at the screen for a long moment. That was it. That was the mask slipping off. We weren't dealing with incompetence anymore. We were dealing with fraud by design. Mindy got quiet for a beat, then said, "Let's bury them." That same day, the sheriff's investigator, Detective Chambers, called. "We have enough to execute a search warrant on the HOA office," he said. "We're pulling bank statements and server backups. I'll keep you posted." 2 mornings later, they did just that. Unmarked cars rolled up to the HOA's little clubhouse/office at 6:30 a.m. The board members, dressed like suburban aristocrats in golf polos and athleisure wear, stood on the lawn with mugs of coffee and confused expressions, while county techs walked out with hard drives. Karen, of course, didn't show up. Rumor had it she was on vacation. At the same time, I received a call from Elaine. The widowed teacher HOA had also targeted. She sounded shaken. "Someone just banged on my door," she whispered. "Said they were from HOA Legal. Wanted to discuss a settlement option." "They threaten you?" "No," she said. "They begged. Told me I'd be taken care of if I withdrew the complaint." I told her to record everything. She did better. She got the guy's face on her Ring cam and sent it to me. Mindy's PI identified him as an off-the-books consultant who'd worked for a firm known for cleaning up HOA image problems. Translation: fixer. These people were unraveling. I took that video, combined it with the footage of Karen's training session, and sent it to Rick Mendez from HOA Hunter. He dropped a follow-up video within 48 hours titled "Sheep and Liens: How One HOA Created a Culture of Control." It went viral, again. Within 72 hours, the Cypress Ridge Facebook group, once a tightly moderated Karen-led echo chamber, turned into a digital mutiny. Residents posted fines, unexplained fees, letters with contradictory bylaws. One man said he'd been fined for his car being too yellow. Another said HOA threatened to dig up his patio if he didn't return it to approved paver status. I was getting emails from homeowners across the state, dozens of them, asking for help, advice, templates. Some even offered donations to help fund our legal battle. I didn't ask for that, but I didn't say no either. Jeffrey, watching all this unfold from the couch with a glass of scotch in hand, just muttered, "You've officially become HOA public enemy number 1. I raised my glass. To tyranny in yoga pants. He chuckled. Cheers. That night, I received an email with no subject line, no body, just a PDF. It was Karen's arrest record from 1997, a sealed case in Nevada, forgery and misappropriation of public funds. I stared at it for a long time. This war wasn't over, but I finally knew who I was fighting. I always said courtrooms smell like anxiety and stale coffee. That day was no exception. The courthouse was packed. Not just the usual suits and stenographers. Local reporters lined the benches. Homeowners I didn't even know stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Some wore HOA-branded polos, maybe loyalists, maybe just nosy. But others? I recognized them from email chains and comment threads, people who'd been waiting for someone to punch the bully in the teeth. I wore a plain navy suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up just enough to show I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty. Mindy sat beside me, calm as ever. She was born for this. Karen arrived 15 minutes late. She walked in like a ghost of herself. No confidence in her stride, no clipboard, no fake smile. Her attorney, a man with an expensive haircut and the charisma of wet cardboard, looked more annoyed than prepared. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with an allergy to nonsense, called us to order. First came the HOA's claim. Their lawyer droned on about community integrity, rule enforcement, historical annexation procedures. He even tried to reframe the break-in as a proactive compliance check. The judge arched one eyebrow. "You entered his home without consent," he stammered, "with implied authority. Do you have a signed agreement from the defendant consenting to such authority?" "We believe." "No, you assumed. Keep going." When it was our turn, Mindy didn't waste a second. She laid out the documents like dominoes: clean title, plat maps, GIS data, zoning exclusions, and a signed affidavit from the original developer confirming my property was never part of Cypress Ridge. Then she brought out the big guns: the financial audit. "Over $300,000 in undocumented enforcement fines," she said, holding the spreadsheets. "Numerous vendor contracts executed without homeowner approval, rental agreements signed under the HOA's name for properties outside their jurisdiction." Karen shifted in her seat. Her attorney scribbled something in a yellow legal pad but didn't object. He couldn't. Then came the video. The courtroom went still as the projector screen lowered and Karen's voice echoed across the chamber. "A lot of these homeowners don't know what they signed. Perception is power." She buried her face in her hands. Mindy continued calm and surgical. "We submit this as evidence of willful deception, intentional misrepresentation of governance authority, and psychological manipulation of residents for financial gain." Then, as if fate had a flair for drama, the door opened at the back of the courtroom. Detective Chambers walked in, flanked by two uniformed deputies. He didn't speak, just handed a folder to the judge, nodded to Mindy, and stood quietly at the side. The judge flipped through the documents, her face unreadable. Then she looked over her glasses at Karen. "Mrs. Wallace, do you have legal representation in criminal matters?" Karen blinked. "What?" "You may want to consult someone who specializes in white-collar defense." Dead silence. The judge recessed for 10 minutes. When she returned, her voice was like steel on marble. "Based on the evidence provided and preliminary findings from the county sheriff's investigation, this court is authorizing the immediate seizure of Cypress Ridge HOA's financial records and suspending its legal authority pending further review. The defendant is hereby removed from all HOA claims, and the plaintiff's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice." Karen's attorney stood up, trying to object. "Sit down," the judge snapped. "And Mrs. Wallace," she motioned to the deputies, "due to sufficient probable cause related to document forgery, financial misconduct, and trespassing with intent to defraud, you are hereby remanded into custody pending formal charges." The bailiff stepped forward. Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her knees buckled. One of the deputies had to catch her by the arm. She was handcuffed right there in the courtroom, in front of the homeowners she once ruled like a queen. Somewhere behind me, someone clapped. Just once. The judge turned toward me. "Mr. Holloway, you are entitled to pursue damages via civil court. You may submit a separate filing for restitution." Mindy smiled at me. I didn't smile back. Not yet, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It took a few days for the dust to settle, but the aftershocks hit harder than the trial itself. Local news picked up the footage of Karen being cuffed in court. It aired on every channel, replayed like a bad local crime drama, complete with voiceover summaries and dramatic piano music. One segment called it "The Fall of Cypress Ridge." Another, less subtle, dubbed her the Queen of Fraud. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Because the damage she caused wasn't just to me. In the week that followed, 5 other homeowners came forward with documentation. Some were from Cypress Ridge. Others were from neighboring communities where Karen had previously worked as a compliance consultant. Turns out, her company, Cypress Consulting and Compliance Services, LLC, had quietly been issuing boilerplate HOA paperwork under the guise of state-registered authority. The documents were slick, professional, legalese heavy, but the signatures? Fake. Every single one. One homeowner, a woman in her 60s, broke down in my driveway. She'd been fined over $12,000 across 3 years and had refinanced her house twice to stay compliant. "I thought I was the one doing something wrong," she whispered. Mindy immediately included these victims into our civil fraud filing, expanding our case to class action status. And then, one morning, the sheriff's office called me again. They'd executed a warrant to seize Karen's HOA email accounts. Inside her inbox was something unexpected, a folder titled Internal Quiet Enforcement Leads. The contents were chilling. Lists of homeowners flagged as vulnerable, widowed, single, elderly, out of state, non-confrontational. Notes like, target parcel 83C next quarter, probable low resistance. Owner works offshore, delay enforcement until absence. Family of 4, new to area, might fold under pressure. She wasn't just running a fraud ring, she had an algorithm for compliance, and yet she still underestimated people. Cypress Ridge HOA, now under temporary court conservatorship, was being audited by county-appointed investigators. Its funds were frozen, board members suspended pending review, and its legal status was on the verge of dissolution. I filed for civil damages, a lawsuit for $480,000 in punitive and compensatory awards, citing harassment, trespass, emotional distress, property damage, and attempted fraud. We won, unanimously. The jury took under 4 hours to deliberate. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled like I'd been holding my breath since the day Karen stormed into my house with that fake badge and a mouthful of rules. Part of the ruling also included formal exoneration of all HOA claims against me, full removal of any references in Cypress Ridge databases, and, most satisfying, an order requiring HOA leadership to issue written apologies to each victim. I received mine 2 weeks later, typed, signed, stained with what I swear looked like tears. Even Jeffrey cracked a grin when I showed him. But the most powerful moment came when I received an invite, not from an attorney or a clerk or a reporter, but from Elaine, the widowed teacher. She asked if I'd be willing to attend a small backyard gathering. Nothing big, just a thank you dinner with the homeowners who'd been liberated by the case. I said yes. We grilled burgers. We drank cheap beer. We laughed harder than I'd laughed in years. One of the neighbors, an older gentleman named Charles, raised his glass. To Richard Holloway, he said, the only man who told the HOA to go to hell and made them stay there. I nodded, not out of pride, but because I'd seen the blueprint now. This wasn't just Cypress Ridge. This was happening everywhere, and someone needed to start fighting it. 6 months later, I hung the photograph in my office. It wasn't some courtroom sketch or award plaque. It was a printout from the courtroom video, Karen mid-turn, wide-eyed, just as the deputy reached for the cuffs. I had it professionally framed, matted in black, with a brass plate beneath that read, "Always lock your door," or something like this might walk in. Clients laugh when they see it. They always ask if it's real. I always say yes. My practice had changed by then. I wasn't just consulting on mineral rights or land disputes anymore. Word had spread, first locally, then across the state, and eventually across the country. People started emailing me stories about rogue HOAs, predatory fines, forged rules, and suburban intimidation campaigns. I couldn't take every case, but I could do something. So I founded the Homeowner Liberty Initiative, a legal aid program specializing in helping homeowners push back against overreaching HOAs, shady compliance boards, and corrupt community managers. It wasn't a nonprofit, but I kept it affordable. Sliding scale, retainer-free where I could. I partnered with Jeffrey and Mindy. Together, we built a network of volunteer attorneys, whistleblower-friendly realtors, and a few sympathetic journalists, including Rick from HOA Hunter, who now had his own late-night segment thanks to the Karen case. We called it the Fence Line Project. Our first success? A retired firefighter in Arizona who'd been fined $10,000 for installing a backyard garden without proper biodiversity alignment. Yes, that's an actual phrase. We crushed them in mediation. More followed, and with each win, my email filled with 2 kinds of messages. Can you help me? Thank you. One night, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a simple note. I was part of it. I voted on those fake maps. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm sorry. You did the right thing. No signature, just a $20 bill and a note that said, "For the fight." I kept the bill, framed it, right next to the picture of Karen. Sometimes I sit on the back porch looking out at the lake, remembering that morning she barged into my kitchen like a tax collector with a god complex. The irony still makes me smile. The gate now has a camera. The locks are electronic. But even more important, the line between my property and their reach is now written, printed, recorded, and burned into county records in triplicate. They'll never touch this land again. And if they try, they'll meet a version of me I didn't even know existed until all this started.